You know, a couple years ago, if you were to ask me what my favorite Thomas and Friends episode was, chances are I wouldn't give a solid answer. Honestly, it changed a lot. More recently, however, my nostalgia kick brought me to Season 5, my personal favorite season of all of Thomas and Friends. And it's in this season I would argue the best episode is held, or what I would call the best episode. If you're anything like me, this story is a classic one. But for those who may not be as acquainted, yes, you read the title correctly. Imagine an episode based on Percy, already a win, in which Percy causes an entire mine to collapse, and as such gets basically buried alive. Yeah, you wouldn't see this in All Engines Go. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be talking about Put Upon Percy, the 9th episode of Season 5, but almost certainly number 1 in my heart. 1, for honestly how unique it was, 2, of course, for the fact it was based around Percy, and 3, for just the stakes and situations this episode handles. It's what I would call the standard gauge alternative to Rusty and the Boulder, an episode with so much intensity it doesn't really make a lot of sense. I thought this was a kid's show. But it's arguably that makes this episode so special. That and the fact we'll likely never get an episode like this ever again. So with all of that being said, ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and jump into my favorite Thomas and Friends episode of all time. And why I think it's so unique, special, and, well, one of the best. There's also quite a bit to cover, so let's go ahead and jump into the story. It all begins when Percy comes into the yard complaining, saying that he and his driver both are feeling put upon with work, a phrase that confuses Thomas but Annie and Clarabelle find quite delightful.
Percy's been put upon, Percy's been put upon, poor old Percy, tee-hee-hee-hee-hee.
Percy then is sent on multiple jobs around the island that result in him getting quite dirty, something the trucks are quick to point out, and when he goes home that night to rest, the other engines are too. This time being mocked by Thomas with the phrase he used earlier.
"We can see what's been put upon you," said Thomas.
But this quickly is shut down when the fat controller interrupts, who thanks Percy for his hard day's work, and tells him to get some rest for tomorrow. Percy of course follows suit, and the next day is sent to the coal depot, where upon arriving at the mine with some empty trucks, is told by one of the miners that their mechanism is jammed, requesting Percy to give it a good bump, which of course he does. But Percy, being careless, ends up bumping the trucks way too hard, which, to be fair, did unjam the mechanism, but also sent the trucks down the mine. Also, quick note, this has nothing to do with the story, but the truck seen at the front of the jam is wearing s.c.ruffy's face. Now, it's unlikely and unconfirmed that this is actually s.c.ruffy, but I like to think it is. More for the simple fact it can serve as an end to his story, but we'll get more into that shortly. As expected, the trucks go on a free ride through the mine, the entire time being none the wiser to how much danger they're in and just wanting to go faster, in typical troublesome truck fashion. This situation ends exactly how you think it does, with the trucks not only crashing but being buried in the mine. It just so happens our potential Scruffy hit a support beam as well, so very quickly the entire mine starts to collapse in on itself. The workmen are quick to recognize this and sound the alarm, but Percy is still in the same spot as before, and as such is very quickly hit by the backdraft of the collapse. Percy ends up alright after this, but he and his crew realize the immediate danger they're in, and knowing their options are limited, decide to make a run for it. It's during this not only an avalanche starts, but the tracks under Percy start to shift, and it's here they all realize there's not really anything they can do. Even running at this point is futile given the rails are not secure. And as all of this is happening, Percy suddenly remembers a canvas barrier in which he had seen earlier. He makes a final sprint for it, just making it and also bumping into the avalanche on the other side of it. With nowhere else to go, the canvas barrier thankfully did save them, but not from being buried. And very quickly, where Percy used to be is now covered by a landslide. This leaves everyone else at the mine to assume they've been buried alive, and they have, but they survived the ordeal. Everyone else doesn't know that though. As such, they inform Sir Topham Hatt and immediately get to digging out Percy, who, after this traumatic event, is awarded a new coat of paint, as well as an overdue apology from Thomas, who was also at the efforts to rescue Percy. So, despite everything that happened, at least it ends on a positive note, with all previous conflicts being resolved, a very memorable story, and my favorite part of all, well done model action, which this episode is full of. And while we're on this subject, I might as well get into the next one, which is why we'll never have another episode like this. Of course, the model making part of things is immediately gone because the show is now animated. That, however, is pretty obvious. What I more mean instead is we'll never get an episode with this sort of situations or stakes ever again. We definitely saw something similar in Legend of the Lost Treasure. I mean, in that movie we see Thomas die almost 3 times alone in the chase scene. It was definitely pretty intense. So at a time the show wasn't scared to replicate this. We even see Thomas get dynamite thrown at him. So to say that these very serious situations never happened again is just incorrect. What I will argue, however, is there's a very big difference between the two. And while both may handle very serious situations, they produce very different feelings. One a feeling of, oh my gosh, what's gonna happen next? And the other a, oh no, you got this, Thomas, kind of feeling instead. But let's be honest, there was no doubt Thomas was gonna come out of it alright. And I think most people, even in this situation, would assume the best for Thomas. Personally, I'd argue Put Upon Percy does not share in this fact. And while it's safe to assume the best is going to happen to Percy, it definitely doesn't do it for you, with constant cutaway shots showing you how serious the avalanche is getting, or maybe showing you how serious the dip in the tracks has become. The narrator says the canvas barrier saves Percy, but we don't actually know until he's been dug up, with shots like this showing us in some cases the worst did happen. They may have survived the ordeal, but still are buried. You also would think they'd run the chance of suffocating, but like I said, the show says they're fine, so we won't touch on that. It ends in the best case scenario, but you have to watch to the end to see it. Like I said earlier, a good plot and amazing model work led to a very thrilling episode. Everything from Percy doing his work to the chase sequence in the mine, the interactions between the characters, the eventual crash and collapse at the mine, all up to Percy's escape and rescue, are not all only perfectly executed but instantly memorable. No other episode has this aesthetic, these kind of stakes, and very few like it have model work that feels so intentional. The entire time feeling like you're actually there watching this mine collapse, while also wondering if one of the best characters in the show is about to meet his demise. Like we established before, of course he doesn't, and this is a situation that's kinda hard to tackle with a kid's show. Or really the topic of danger like this is hard to convey in any childlike media. However, if this is something you want to do, I would argue this is how you do it right. Since while that danger is a pretty big factor of the episode and very clearly displayed, the bigger focus of the episode is on Percy and how he saves himself and his crew from that danger. In a sense, this gave a method to the madness, while the episode itself was one that was very seriously toned, with the danger discussed being on full display. It made the episode not really about that. Instead of the stressful situation being the story, how Percy dealt with the situation is the story. And while this may be an episode where the exact moral is kinda hard to find, in some cases maybe that's just not what we need. The personalities of the characters shown are displayed perfectly. The action that takes place in it not only feels but looks real, but most importantly, it's unmistakable. You can look at any shot from this episode and tell that it's this episode. And it's that makes me fear we may never get something like this again. Now, the model series has been over for a while, so getting that realism factor is a bit harder. And like we established, at a time the show was just fine with doing the same sort of thing, as we saw in Legend of the Lost Treasure. These both are times that have sadly passed us, however. Not only will situations like this, with this sort of intensity, likely not be repeated, but I also fear we're at a point where episodes like this just can't exist. When you watch All Engines Go, or most of the CGI series, unless something specific is happening, it's hard to take a single frame from that and be able to tell what episode it really is. I'm sure the same could be said about the entire hit era of the model series. But when it came to Season 5, or at least Put Upon Percy, this was nowhere to be found. And though we may never have something official like this ever again, at least we have what once was, and I'm very happy to have grown up at a time where episodes like this were the norm. It also makes me feel especially bad for the kids who will grow up without it, but hopefully this video helps a little bit with that. And hopefully you guys enjoyed my breakdown of my personal favorite Thomas and Friends episode, well, ever. It was beyond a blast to make. If you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to let me know down in the comments, and I'd love to make more. There's Rusty in the Boulder, James in the Trouble with Trees, Ghost Train, so many different episodes I could jump into, so be sure to let me know down below, and I'll be sure to jump on those as soon as I can. Really quick, I want to give a huge shout out to my patrons, and if you made it this far, consider liking and subscribing for even more train content, since there's always more stuff on the way. As always guys, thanks again for watching, and with all of that being said, hopefully I'll see you guys in the next one.
I'm sorry we teased you, Percy, said Thomas. You were certainly put upon by that avalanche. Yes, indeed, but just look at my new coat of paint. Now, I don't mind that being put upon me.
Either subscribe, donate, or get the fuck out.